There is a specific kind of peace that comes with the ancient faith, a quiet readiness. But I didn't start out with this perspective. I was born in 1957, and my early faith took root in an evangelical environment. In those circles, the Christian life was often overshadowed by a constant, tense anticipation. We were taught to expect an imminent, secret rapture that would pull believers out of the world at any second. It bred a habit of newspaper exegesis. Instead of shaping our imagination around the sacraments, we were taught to read current global crises as countdowns on a prophecy chart. My birth year marks a specific starting point for this era of speculation. In 1957, delegates signed the Treaty of Rome, beginning the process of European integration. In that environment, ordinary political developments were viewed as milestones on a final countdown. Spiritual readiness was replaced by political obsession. We were trained to decode geopolitics rather than live in present-day holiness. That habit accelerated in the late 1960s. When war redrew borders in the Middle East, the prophecy charts shifted their entire focus to modern Israel. By the 1970s, global economic shocks hit. People saw long lines at the gas pump and immediately interpreted them as the beginning of end-to-end treasury control and international chaos. During my years in the army in the late 70s, the Shah of Iran fell. That single event ignited new fears of an anti-Israel coalition forming exactly as described in the book of Ezekiel. Watching that anti-Western fervor fill the streets convinced prophecy watchers that civilizational collapse was right around the corner. Then the Cold War hit its peak in the 1980s. The Soviet Union was explicitly cast as the biblical Gog, an empire destined to march its military directly into the Middle East. Treating every war and revolution as a prerequisite for the end didn't bring anyone closer to God. It created an exhausting, fearful distraction from the gospel. You eventually have to ask what happens to a predictive system when the predicted end of the world fails to arrive. When the Soviet Union collapsed, older prophecy charts relying on a Soviet villain were proven wrong. Instead, the speculation simply shifted to new enemies. In the 1990s, attention pivoted back to Europe. Complex political treaties were viewed by prophecy teachers as the formation of a revived Roman Empire. In the Middle East, major diplomatic accords were treated with deep suspicion. Every peace effort was scrutinized as a potential false covenant with the Antichrist. And when Europe rolled out a unified currency, it sparked fresh panics about global economic control and the infrastructure for the mark of the beast. A theological framework that survives by updating its villains and moving its goalposts has abandoned biblical interpretation for a cycle of speculation. But the problem goes deeper than historical failures. Modern dispensationalism divides what Christ has united. The first major error treats Israel and the Church as completely separate prophetic tracks, giving them distinct destinies instead of one shared fulfillment in the Messiah. This division treats the Church as a temporary parenthesis while believers wait for a rebuilt, physical stone temple. And finally, the invention of the secret rapture. It's a theology of evacuation that promises comfortable modern Christians they alone will be exempt from suffering. By redirecting Christian hope away from endurance and the sacraments and pointing it toward escape and geopolitics, this system has become a dangerous false gospel. The Orthodox Church approaches eschatology differently. She does not begin with newspaper headlines. She begins entirely with the victory of Christ. The Apostolic Confession is clear. Christ is not waiting to become king in some postponed earthly program. He is king right now. There is no secret evacuation and no invisible rapture. We confess one glorious, visible, and final return to judge the living and the dead. The kingdom is already present here and now. It is participated in mystically through the Church and the Eucharist. The Church stands as the bride of Christ and the living temple where heaven and earth already meet. When Christ commands us in Matthew 24 to watch and pray, he isn't asking us to decode political treaties or track digital currencies. When we see the raw tragedy of war, the Christian response is grief, prayer, and moral clarity. Turning human suffering into data for a chart obscures the gospel. The spirit of lawlessness is real, but obsessing over the exact identity of the Antichrist is a distraction from the much harder task of examining our own souls. Looking back at these decades of geopolitical anxiety, the weight of the prophecy charts begins to fall away. We do not need timelines. We need oil in our lamps. The true cry of the church is not an anxious plea for escape, but a peaceful, repentant, "Come, Lord Jesus."